Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Ron Kraybill. Ron is a peacebuilding practitioner, a professor, trainer, consultant, and author. Ron is also a former senior advisor on peacebuilding and development at the United Nations Development Program. His areas of studies have included history, peace, and conflict management at Goshen College, and religion studies and peace and conflict studies at Harvard University. Now, I've known Ron for many years. He's a founder of Riverhouse Press and the developer of one of the leading conflict management tools, Style Matters. Ron, it's such a pleasure to have you back on the Success Insight podcast.
Thanks, Howard. It's wonderful to be here.
For our listeners, I alluded to it in the introduction. I've known Ron for a number of years, and I have been using his conflict management tool, Style Matters, for quite a while. And I've gotten to know Ron both through the studying the tool, but also his writings in the area of conflict and peace building and how we move beyond the butting of heads and the coming to some type of collaboration, consensus, etc. And he's also a very prolific writer in his new life post the UN. And he wrote a piece a couple weeks ago, January 14th, you wrote the piece on Facebook regarding the January 6th. I don't know, I would call it an attempted coup. I don't know what you'd call it, Ron. But, after reading this article, and folks, we're going to give you links back to Ron's Facebook page where this piece resides. But I really thought I wanted to bring Ron back on to the Success Insight podcast to get his perspective on what we're going through here in the U.S. when it comes to conflict and how do we move beyond this vitriolic rhetoric that is just been a part of our lives these last 4 to 6 years. So a long-winded intro there, Ron. Welcome back. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Howard. It's really a pleasure to be with you. We've got a really challenging chapter in our lives right now, and I don't claim to have the answers for it, but I have many thoughts that I've been pondering these weeks, and so I'm really pleased at the possibility just to reflect with you.
That's fantastic. If you wouldn't mind, you've been in some pretty hotspot type areas in your career where there's been a lot of very heavy duty conflict. And I'm wondering if you could briefly just provide a little bit of background for our listeners and the type of work that you have been doing throughout your career.
My work is peace building. And what that means in practical terms is that I've spent many years working with people who are in situations of great conflict, trying to figure out peaceful ways of resolving them. I've done that in various auspices. I did it for a number of years for the UN. I also spent 6 years in South Africa at the leading conflict resolution center there from 89 to 95 over the time of the South African transition. And I've done training in Ireland and Sri Lanka and Myanmar and many other places. One of the things that I have across the years repeatedly tried to do is to engage religious leaders in response to the conflict situations that are unfolding, because religious leaders often are a part of the problem and can be a fantastic resource as a part of the solution if they're willing to step up to it. And my own background, I come from a conservative Christian background and then went to Harvard Divinity School. So I moved to a very different sort of perspective religiously. But across my life have felt that religious communities are a key piece of who we need to engage with when there's conflict. Not the only piece, but a key one.
In the last, I would say 20, 30 years, perhaps this was right around the time during the Clinton administration, Newt Gingrich and the Jerry Falwell, the real, what they would say, the Christian right, it started to have an increasingly more vocal voice. And the rhetoric attached to that has just been increasing, to the point where, when this past election cycle, where there's the marriage between this, this rhetoric, very vitriolic rhetoric, as well as, just it seems like the hatred is just kind of ratcheting up. And so I'm wondering, is it because we've just ignored it and we've let things just kind of, the proverbial pot of boiling water is on the stove and we've just let it consistently boil and boil?
Hard to say. The thing about it is, even if we wanted to do something about it, it's not like you can just sort of squelch that kind of stuff. So I'm reluctant to say it's because we allowed it to boil. I think we need to think about root causes. I view this militancy actually as a sign of great vulnerability. Religion tends to become dangerous when it's weak. And because religion that is strong and confident, especially if it's institutionalized religion, will often not be drawn into great excesses. Certainly we can find exceptions to that across history. I mean, the Inquisition, for example. But I'm persuaded by the scholars who think about the religious militancy that we see in various places around the world, who view it as a sign of the wrestling of religious people to come to terms with the sort of the weakening of their base and the dissolution of their control over their own lives. That doesn't mean that we should just let them do what they want, but I think it does give us a different perspective if we view it that way than if we just think that somehow they're big and strong out there.
It's interesting, and a word that comes to mind for me is the word fear, that there is a groups of many people, and this is not just Christian evangelical right. It could be, in Judaism, ultra Orthodox, but people who, for whatever reason, are fearful because their comfort is, over the last many years, there's loss of jobs, the ability to make a living, put a roof over our heads. The career we have today, tomorrow could be gone because it has been sourced out, or, it's ever increasingly being replaced. And I'm wondering, as I see this loss of control is also and I'm curious what your perspective is. It seems there's this fear as well, because things that I expected in my life are no longer there, and I have nobody else to blame. And therefore, with that can't blame, loss of control, and I start to grasp for things that can at least explain things to me.
Yeah. I want to pick up on that and take it in a particular direction here. It's not only about fear, it's about vulnerability and the kinds of internal conflicts that arise when institutions and movements are weakening. And I want to create an image in your head here for a minute. If we had a whiteboard, we'd do it on the board. We can do it in our heads here because your listeners are on audio. If you could imagine a picnic table that has a bench on either side, and that picnic table, we're using it to imagine conflict. When people think about conflict, big conflicts like the kind that divide societies or that we see in politics or whatever, they tend to imagine it, let's say, a picnic table with a big arrow across the table, and you've got, these two sides who are duking it out there at that table. That's the sort of instinctive image that we carry in our head about conflict. But there's an alternative way of diagramming this that I've used for many years that I've found helpful in a lot of situations that I think takes us to critical dynamics we need to understand if we're going to get anywhere with protracted conflict. That arrow that we see across the table is there, but in fact, the most crucial arrows that we often need to be paying attention to, if we want to get a hold of this conflict for purposes of managing it and getting to a more constructive place, is the arrows behind the table. If you can imagine one arrow going through a bench on one side and one arrow through a bench on the other side, there is conflict on both sides of that table. It's left wing of the Democratic Party, and it's the moderate and traditional wing of the Democratic Party. It's the institutional Republicans, and it's the populist Republicans. So there's that second layer of arrows. And then imagine an additional set of arrows behind the table on each side. And you could draw about 3 more layers of arrows behind the table on each side to represent conflicts that exist within each of those parties. One of those arrows would be, I would call grassroots level. Another would be sort of middle level. Another would be sort of top level. Now, what I'm doing here is complexifying the image that we have of conflict. We tend to have this very simplistic notion of conflict. It's, liberals versus conservatives, Democrats versus Republicans, and that's all we see. But in fact, when you look at the history of, for example, I've worked many times across the years in situations of sort of revolutionary violence, South Africa, Middle East, Myanmar. There'd be a variety of situations like that. When you actually get in close, often the dynamics that are the hardest to deal with are not between the two parties at the top. It's actually the infighting that's going on within each side. And often then there's a big gap between the guys sitting at the table and the grassroots. And the grassroots will sometimes say, that guy up there at the table, he claims to represent us, and he represents some of his people, but a lot of us really actually don't. We just think, he's outdated, or he's too radical, or he's not radical enough, whatever it is. When you get a major conflict going, it is a whole field of arrows that you need to represent that conflict. And I think that, we see that right now, of course, playing out in a big way within the Republican Party, and we don't know yet how that's going to work out. It's also an issue in the Democratic Party, and it is. I guess I got onto this because we were talking about religious actors. It's also part of what's going on with religious leaders, because they are also dealing with the extreme stress that they feel trying to hold together their own people as the world changes around them.
It's interesting as you were describing the picnic table. And by the way, if you have an image of this, we can make it a JPEG and we'll put it up on the.
I've got it on some slides. We can easily post that.
Oh, excellent! We'll put it up on our show notes. And as you were describing this, Ron, I was thinking of a system. In coaching and in psychology, we learned about systems theory. Is the gears you see were the two people at the picnic table, but then there's those gears turning, and those are the other systems that are at play, and they're not always in agreement. And there's a lot to be mindful of and to pay attention to. And given where we were on January 6th, when the president at the time and his supporters are out in front of the White House, and now there's this march to the Capitol. That was a pretty scary time for this country. And part of me is like that this could even happen, but it did. And, we're going to learn more about it, continue to learn more about it in the days and months to come. But how do we begin to address what's at the table, and then what's happening behind the people at the table, because if we don't do something, we're going to be here in 2 years from now when the next, the midterm elections arrive. We're going to be here 4 years from now when the next presidential election arises. I don't think we can, as a country, can handle another episode that we just experienced a couple of weeks ago.
It's a very big question. There's many things that need to be done. I appreciate very much right now that Joe Biden seems to take very seriously the need to just bring down the volume quite a few notches. And I appreciate that he seems to be really invested in practical responses to the issues that face our country. It's going to take more than that yet. And the question is what? And the list of stuff that we need to think about is probably pretty long. Just to mention a few things. One is, I think that we need to do some work at a caucus level. In other words, within our own numbers about what's going on. It's a response that I learned in working in protracted international conflicts, that the instinct is always to go in and it's like, we want to bring together the high-level politicians. We want to, the whites and blacks in South Africa. And that needs to happen eventually. But sometimes the fastest way to get there is to actually do some work on coalition building within the parties themselves. Because if the parties and groups are functioning better, with more confidence, with less vulnerability to their extremes, it tends to smooth out the process and you can run a more principled approach. I'm not sure if that will work here now, but to me, it's an interesting idea to think about what that would look like. There was something in the news a couple of days ago that I read that I thought was very interesting. An account in, I believe it was the Washington Post, about how Democrats got together to anticipate the difficulties, the problems that Trump might create for them. And they started way back in spring, I believe, and began to work together and anticipated all the possible loops that might be thrown at them and worked out strategies for each one. And one of them included what Trump in the end did, refusing to honor the election. And they were all ready for it, including a strategy they agreed that, well, actually, let me say this. Yeah, it was a wide variety of Democratic groups, including Black Lives Matter and traditional party Democrats and union-oriented people. So it was quite a wide spectrum of people. And because they had been working together, they were able to act unitedly. And that included, for example, that the more radical groups kept their people off the streets for those early January protests. And we can all thank God that they did that, because if we had had a reaction from the left to what happened, to what that extreme right did, it could have been, we truly could have lost our democracy. It's clearly what the extremists wanted. They wanted to stir up trouble so bad that then, you could declare martial law, and Trump would have been happy to do that. It could have been curtains. And there are times and places when the extreme left would not do that kind of thing, I think. One of the people commenting about this, one of the key designers who commented about this, said, it was good that we worked together, but it's just terrible that we had to do that in that way. And my thought was, come on, man, you just did exactly what we need to be doing all the time. We actually need to have coalition building on both sides of the spectrum. I'm talking about the left here, but if someone is from the right, we would want to see that there as well, because if we get more stability within the polls, then we'll be able to deal with things more effectively in the middle. It reminds me here of a comment that really stuck with me years ago in South Africa. which had a union movement, which was very threatening to the corporate people in the beginning. Unions make trouble. They're strong, they're militant, they're out there organizing. And I was in a workshop once with a senior corporate director who told me that he had, in the early days, he was very skeptical of the union movement, but he said, I have come to see that we are all better off for it. And he said, the reason is because a strong union makes a more stable negotiation process. He said, before we had, when there were no unions, we had wildcat strikes, everything was chaos and unpredictable, and we didn't have anyone to negotiate with. Now, when there's a strike, we know who we're negotiating with, and if we work something out at the table, it's their job to get their people to go along with it. So part of what I think we need to be doing is coalition building within each party. And right now we're in this attitude of everybody's like, go it alone. That's my word for our times. It's the go it aloners. We've got 1 million go it aloners out there. Everybody's doing their own thing, and it's just chaos. We need to begin talking, and first of all, with our own allies and the people naturally sort of within our own camps, and begin to build some forums for dialogue there.
I love just the picture you've painted. And I was thinking the folks who were on the let's go the disruptive side, whatever side that was, they didn't anticipate COVID-19. And so that in some ways is as horrific as it is. I mean, we've passed the 400,000 deaths, at least as far as we know. It's continuing to ratchet up those numbers, people affected. So we've got jobs, businesses going under. That issue, this pandemic, has forced both parties to find a way to work together. Now, I think we're discovering the prior administration, I don't know what they were doing, but for whatever reason, their eyes were not on the ball. Well, I could leave it at that. And now we have this concerted effort to get the government working with the states to deliver the personal protective equipment, the vaccines, coordinate the vaccinations. And I would think that this pandemic is the opportunity for both sides of the table to work together.
Yeah, I agree with it. It is the superordinate threat, which the theorists always talk about, superordinate goal. And we are going to sink or swim on this one together. If you want to think of this, the cosmos reaching in somehow at this time, you could say that maybe that's the moral burden of the pandemic, to actually enable human beings to come to terms with the fact that no man exists on an island by himself, no woman, no child. We are all in this together, and we're going to sink or swim, and we can live in the illusion of independence for in certain ways for a certain period of time, both on the environmental front and the health front, where we now increasingly are dealing with forces so big and so much beyond our control that we either face up to our interdependency or we die. It's just that simple.
Right. What advice would you give, Ron, to, I guess it could cut across all spectrums, the young in high school, junior high, college, to get involved and to become aware of the importance of building these coalitions? How would we educate them to take on this mantle and, make the world a better place to live?
One of the things that there's a diagram that I can also, we can post on the web, Howard, that your viewers can look at. It's a pyramid. I call it a pyramid of competency, about the competencies that are required if we're going to build a peaceful world. And it starts down at the bottom at competency in dealing with conflict between ourselves and other individuals. And then it comes up a level of competency in mediating conflicts, then competency in working in facilitating small groups. And it goes up, and there's like 8 or 10 layers there. At the very top is international conflict. One of the reasons why the world is in such a terrible state right now is that we have never invested in a systematic way in the skills required to build bridges and to build consensus and work out significant conflicts. And we're in a world led by leaders who are totally incompetent at most of the levels of this kind of pyramid that I'm talking about. They're working up there at the top, but those around them would be the first to tell you that many of them can't work out a conflict with other individuals if it was to save their life, let alone to facilitate a meeting in a way that builds consensus. So one of my big missions is to get people to take those skills seriously. Any person who thinks it's a cool idea to live in a world at peace should start by working on the skills in that pyramid of competency. And we can work at it at any level. I mean, we all got to start at the lower levels, but you can work on skills for resolving conflict between yourself and another person. Doesn't mean you're going to have a perfect life. I mean, I still get in all kinds of quarrels with people around me, but if I have those skills, I have some clue about how to avoid the most damaging things. Or you can be a playground mediator. There are schools where they train 5th grade children in mediating conflicts between other children on the playground. So that's moving up. That's already up 2 or 3 levels. If you are in a setting where there's meetings, staff meetings, team meetings, whatever it is, you can easily get books on facilitating meetings and work on a few basic skills for facilitating meetings. So what I want people to see is that there is this pyramid of skill that we can all move up, regardless to where we are in life. You can get started just with stuff you can find on the web. And if you have a little time and money, you can do a workshop somewhere, a webinar somewhere.
Okay. In addition to this call to action, are there newspapers, magazines, websites? Obviously, Riverhouse Press, and you have a wonderful blog there, and our listeners can visit and learn more about you and your writing. Any other places you would recommend for them to go?
Yeah. Anyone interested could do a simple search on the word conflict resolution, and you will get hits, a phenomenal number of hits just on that term. And you will see that the hits come in many kinds. You'd have to sort of decide, do I want to think about conflict, interpersonal conflict, or group conflict, or political conflict? If you do, you can refine the search a bit. And there's just a lot out there. On my website, which we'll post, I have a page there of free web resources related to conflict styles, which is a concept, sort of a framework that I've taught for many years as one useful tool. And there's a link there on the front page of our site. It's like free stuff. And if you click on that, it's not just free stuff on our website, it's across the web. There's a lot out there, and I'm sorry I should have prepared for that question, because there's actually a lot more that I'm not thinking of at the moment.
Okay. Well, Ron, if you, after the call, I have no doubt all of a sudden you're going to have a stream of consciousness, and just, go ahead and share that with us, and we'll put those sources up on our show notes so our listeners can listen to the materials or get underway for their own searches. One question, before we end the podcast, it involves the word hope, HOPE. How do you feel about hope right now?
It's a great way to close, Howard. I really like that as a closing meme. One of the things that hit me in my work many years ago is that things turn very destructive and or violent when people lose hope in the possibility of getting the things that they feel they really need peacefully. So I realized that keeping hope alive, that it is possible to live at peace or to have a democracy where we can live with diverse views. Keeping that hope alive is foundational. If we don't feed that hope, we're going to end up in violence. Because when people start saying, there's no way my needs can be met in this system, so therefore I'm going to X, whatever it is, throw an election or whatever. Hope is actually a political strategy when you think about it that way. If we want people to work in constructive ways, we have to feed hope. How do we do that? Of course, that's a big question. I might turn that question back to you, Howard Fox, because you've been out there for years feeding other people with ideas for making the world a better place. And I'd like to hear, where do you get the hope that keeps you going?
Oh my God.
You did not expect that one, did you?
No, that one came years ago. In my career, as I like to share, I was a recovering IT business consultant, and I was doing exactly what I was told to do and realizing how miserable I was becoming. And I went into coaching as a way to not only help myself, but also to help others. And what gives me hope is when people realize they have the power to change. They're whether it's a destructive relationship, whether it's conflict, which is one of the reasons I years ago when you and I met, is I needed to help somebody resolve some conflict, and I realized all of us have within us the tools we need to change. Now, sometimes those tools, those abilities are locked in a room. And if I can help someone else unlock that door and go in and recognize and learn how to use those tools to make the world a better place, then, I'm feeling very fortunate to be able to be one of the catalysts for that change. And so, even this last election, with Biden in office now, I have hope now, and there's a long way to go, and which is again gets back to the reason I was really anxious and to get you back on the podcast, and I'm very grateful for that. But I don't think I have a large amount of hope. It's not in full abundance, full flowering. I think it's very tenuous at this point. But the more I think we can have conversations, I can have conversations, be around people that want to change. I think that's what gives me hope. I'd like to be able, I coach. I have a podcast, Ron, with a woman who is a golf pro, and we call it Mindset Monday because she's also coaches mindset. And I'm reminded in golf, occasionally, I don't know if you play golf or have ever swung the clubs, but I'm not a very good golfer. Every once in a while, I get a great swing, and it's just like a miracle has happened. But I'll be darned if I can hit that swing again the next shot. And I think if we can just put those great events, those interactions, and keep repeating them, and because if I can repeat them, then the system changes. And then the next layer of the system changes, then the next layer. And I think that's kind of my focus on the hope. There's an old Jewish proverb that says, tikkun olam, you're not obligated to complete the task, but you're neither free to abandon it. And so I want to be a part of the task for good, making the change that we all want to have in life. So I hope that helped. Did I?
What as you were speaking, Howard, what I was thinking about is I, across the years, have worked with a lot of activists and people who are really moving mountains for decades in situations of great difficulty and struggle for justice or for peace or whatever it is. One of the things that I have come to see is the importance of self-care and taking serious and feeding the inner light that keeps us going, because burnout is a real danger when you care a lot about things, when you're in a big cause. And what I appreciate about the question, about your comments, is the sense that I see that you, let me see, you reflect, you're intentional about what you're doing, you reflect on it, you think about what it is that gives you joy in this work. It's a big inner journey that we have to be on in order to keep going with this work. And we have to do it in various ways. It's about physical self-care, it's about diet, but perhaps more than anything, it's about feeding that inner sense of connection and calling and hope that keeps us going.
Most definitely there. And I think, just again, having you on this episode and just being able to chat with you about your perspective, it just, it was just so very important to me. And so I truly appreciate you coming back on, and, just you've helped. We are still in dire times, but we, just listening to you and your perspective and your views on hope and going forward, I see that helping to add fuel to the task, to keep the task alive. So thank you again for joining us on the Success Insight podcast.
Hopefully 2 years from now, I can come back and we can reflect on that dark time and how a big turn was made towards the light.
I certainly hope so. Ron, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, let's share with them again the best places to get to know you.
Okay, so one would be Kraybill Table. So that's Kraybill. That's my name, kraybilltable.com. That's the blog on my business site. Some of that's about my conflict style inventory, but sometimes it's about bigger issues. I post pretty regularly on LinkedIn and on Facebook. So either of those platforms, if someone just does a search on my name, they should get my blogs there. That's probably the main ways.
Fantastic. And we will most definitely provide the backlinks to again, repeat, is Kraybill?
Kraybill Table.
Kraybill Table. Okay.
Yeah, as in like a kitchen table.
Gotcha. It's just like your picnic table in a way.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we'll definitely provide those.
Years ago, I was presenting that table diagram, and someone started talking about the Kraybill table, and so that
kind of stuck. Yeah. I love it. I never knew that, so I love it. Thank you. So we'll provide the backlinks to the website as well as to your Facebook page and on LinkedIn. So again, Ron, thank you so much, and looking forward to reading more of your work. And again, I'm incredibly grateful that you were able to take the time to join me today. And we'll see you in 2 years, okay?
Sounds good. It's always a privilege talking with you, Howard.
Fantastic. All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Ron Kraybill. He is a peace-building practitioner, professor, trainer, consultant, and author. And we have just been chatting about, God, what are we going through these days? We have conflicts, disagreements. And so just leveraging Ron's years of expertise in peace and conflict studies and perspectives, and just, it was very enlightening to kind of hear, a perspective really from somebody who I look up to just in his work. And, when I think of conflict management, Ron's always the first person that comes to mind for me. And so folks, definitely do go out and check out his work. We'll provide the backlinks to the website, kraybilltable.com, as well as to his LinkedIn and Facebook pages as well. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Do let us know. We are on successinsidepodcast.com. Leave us a comment. We're also on our Success Insight Podcast pages on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And we're on the major podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, etc. And we're also have our LinkedIn channel as well, Success Insight Podcast. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Wear your mask, practice social distancing, take care of yourselves, take care of your family, feed not only your physical self, but also the emotional self as well, because this is not unfortunately, it's not a sprint, this is a marathon. And so make a difference over the long haul. Okay, folks, we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.